Welcome, dear friends, to a soothing journey through the rich and intricate world of Bleach, a tale of spirit battles, hidden powers, and the deep bonds between souls. From the early whispers of Ichigo Kurosaki's transformation to the timeless struggle between the Soul Reapers and the mysterious Quincy, tonight we will slowly drift through the lore of this iconic universe. With each part, we'll explore the origins, key events, and characters whose stories intertwine across worlds, and the profound, often quiet moments that make their journey unforgettable. Let go of the day's weight and allow yourself to settle into the gentle rhythm of this world. With each soft word, each peaceful revelation, may you find rest in the stories that span the heavens and the earth, stories that remind us of the delicate balance between light and darkness. Take a slow breath, dear listener. Feel the warmth of the night and let go of any tension. As we travel through this tale, we'll explore the forgotten, the sacred, and the eternal in a quiet, peaceful embrace. And if you enjoy drifting through stories like this, you're welcome to subscribe and softly share where you're listening from tonight. Now, let us begin our journey into the first chapter of Bleach lore, where the Soul Society finds its roots. In the beginning, there was only the void, a space of endless silence and stillness, unbroken by the pulse of time. From this void arose the Soul Society, a realm that would come to define the balance of existence, and its origins, though hidden in the shadows of ancient history, are filled with echoes of forgotten struggles and quiet triumphs. The Soul Society, as we know it today, is a world governed by order, a place where souls of the deceased are sent to live out the rest of their existence. But it wasn't always so peaceful. Before its rise, there were only souls lost in the endless expanse of the afterlife, wandering aimlessly without purpose. And so, a higher power emerged, the first of the Soul Reapers, tasked with guiding these wandering spirits to their rightful place, bringing order to chaos. The first Soul Reaper, a figure whose name is lost to the winds of time, wielded a sword, Zanpakuto, that would come to symbolize the balance between life and death. This blade was not just a weapon, but a living entity, a reflection of the soul's deepest power, bound forever to its master. In the soft, steady glow of this early age, the Soul Reapers began to form the foundation of what would become the Gotei 13, the 13 divisions that would serve as protectors and guides within the Soul Society. As the Soul Reapers grew in number, so too did their power. They formed the serenity, a fortified district that would house the strongest among them. Within the serenity, the first division's captain led the way, and the soul of the Soul Society began to take shape. This was a place of peace, of deep serenity, a sanctuary for the dead, where the cycle of life and death was carefully tended to, protected by those who had given up their mortal lives to serve the greater good. But even in this calm, hidden beneath the layers of time, there were whispers of danger. The hollow, dark souls that had been tainted by the corruption of fear and rage began to emerge. These creatures, born from unfulfilled souls, would tear apart the delicate balance that the Soul Society had fought so hard to establish. And so, the Soul Reapers, in their wisdom, built the Rukongai, a sprawling district that would house the souls of the deceased, divided into different districts based on their social class. Yet, even within this separation, there was peace, a sense of belonging that would guide them through their afterlives. As the years drifted by, the Soul Society flourished, and with it, the spirit of the Soul Reapers became entwined with the very fabric of the world. Their duties was clear: to protect the realm of the living from the dangers of the dead, and to ensure that the cycle of life and death remained in perfect harmony. Yet as the eons passed, a darkness began to creep into the heart of the Soul Society. Some questioned the rules, the very foundations upon which this realm was built, while others sought power for their own gain. In this quiet unrest, a figure named Eisen emerged, a soul with ambitions that stretched beyond the boundaries of life and death. Eisen's desire for power would shake the Soul Society to its core, beginning a chain of events that would lead to betrayals, secrets, and a war that would change the very nature of existence itself. But all of this was still a whisper in the winds of time, distant and faint. For now, in the stillness of this peaceful era, the Soul Reapers continued their watch, keeping the balance between the living and the dead, ensuring that the cycle remained uninterrupted. And so, the Soul Society stood as a symbol of balance, of quiet strength in the face of an ever-changing world. Yet even as the peace held firm, the soul of the Soul Society would face trials, tribulations, and betrayals that would test its very foundations. But that story is yet to come. For now, let us drift deeper into the peaceful hum of the Soul Society, and remember, as we rest here tonight, the delicate balance between life and death that sustains all things. Long before Ichigo Kurosaki would wield a blade of unimaginable power, before he became a protector of souls, there was only a boy whose life, though ordinary on the surface, would one day ripple through the very fabric of the worlds of the living and the dead. Ichigo's story begins in a quiet town, with no inkling of the extraordinary journey that awaited him. Ichigo was born into the gentle flow of a world that many considered mundane. He lived in the town of Karakura, a place filled with the hum of everyday life, school days, family meals, and the soft rhythm of laughter shared with friends. He was just a teenager, grappling with the ordinary struggles of youth, schoolwork, friendships, and family dynamics. Yet even in this simplicity, Ichigo's life was marked by a deep connection to the people around him, especially to his family. His father, Ishin, was a warm and strong presence, ever ready with a kind word or a gentle reprimand. His sisters, Karin and Yuzu, shared with him the quiet joys of family life, a bond that held strong against the winds of change. But Ichigo's peaceful world, as serene as it seemed, was never meant to stay that way. His connection to the spiritual realm had always been present, though subtle, a constant undercurrent to his existence. It began with the death of his mother, Masaki, a soft yet tragic event that would carve a hollow space in Ichigo's heart, a space that would later be filled with destiny. Masaki's passing left a wound that would never heal, and from that moment on, Ichigo's ability to see spirits was awakened, a rare gift that would set him apart from those around him. It was this gift, this ability to see the spirits that wandered through the living world, that led him to his fateful encounter with Rukia Kuchiki, a soul reaper whose mission it was to guide wandering souls to the Soul Society. Rukia, though an unusual figure at first glance, dressed in black and exuding a quiet strength, was the catalyst for Ichigo's transformation. In a strange twist of fate, Rukia found herself in the living world, her powers temporarily stripped away by an unfortunate incident. And it was in this vulnerable moment that Ichigo, in a desperate act of protection, found himself taking her powers into himself. This act, though unintentional, would forever change the course of his life. As Ichigo stood, his once ordinary life forever altered, he now found himself a protector of the souls of the living. No longer a mere bystander, Ichigo was thrust into a world of unseen dangers and spiritual battles, a world where the lines between the living and the dead were blurred, and where his own strength would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. Rukia, though now weakened, became Ichigo's guide, teaching him the ways of the Soul Reapers and the delicate balance that governed both the living world and the Soul Society. With each passing day, Ichigo grew stronger, his bond with his sword, Zangetsu, deepening. As his power awakened, so too did the weight of his responsibility. No longer could he stand by and watch as the worlds collided. No longer could he remain the passive observer. But in these quiet early days, Ichigo was still uncertain of his place in this new world. He struggled with the burden of his newfound powers, unsure of how to wield them or what they truly meant. His journey was just beginning, a slow, steady awakening to a destiny that would unfold piece by piece, like the pages of a story yet to be written. And yet, as he stood before Rukia, his sword in hand, there was a softness in his heart, a reflection of his quiet determination. He was still the same boy from Karakura, but he was also something more now, something ancient, something destined. The Soul Society had awakened a new force, one that would soon shake the very foundations of its existence. But even then, even as his powers grew, there was no rush, no frantic pace. Ichigo's journey would unfold at its own rhythm, slow and steady, one step at a time. For now, he remained a boy with a sword, still learning what it meant to be a soul reaper. And in the silence of this moment, we rest with him. We let go of the worries and doubts, for in this journey, all things will come in time. Rukia Kuchiki, a soul reaper of noble blood, had never sought fame or glory. She was a figure shrouded in grace, her presence both commanding and serene, as if every step she took carried the weight of centuries. But beneath the polished exterior of a noblewoman and a skilled warrior, Rukia's heart was burdened with a quiet longing. It was this deep, unspoken longing that would lead her to a fateful encounter with Ichigo Kurosaki, forever altering the course of both their lives. Born into the prestigious Kuchiki family, Rukia was raised within the cold, unyielding walls of the Soul Society's aristocratic circles. The Kuchiki family was one of the oldest and most respected in the Soul Society, its name synonymous with power, nobility, and discipline. Yet in the shadows of this noble heritage, Rukia's childhood was marked by a quiet isolation. Her family, while loving in their own way, had expectations that weighed heavily upon her young shoulders. Her older brother, Byakuya Kuchiki, a captain of the Gotei 13, was a model of strength, duty, and emotionless poise, a legacy that Rukia felt she could never live up to. But Rukia's true journey began not in the halls of the Kuchiki Manor, nor within the structured confines of the Soul Society, but in the living world, where she was assigned on a mission to guide the wandering souls of Karakura town. It was here, in this simple human town, that Rukia would encounter Ichigo Kurosaki, a boy who was far from ordinary, though he did not yet know it. The moment she crossed paths with him, her world, like his, began to shift. Her powers, temporarily stripped from her by an unexpected incident, left her vulnerable, unable to protect herself. In this fragile moment, Ichigo unwittingly took her place, absorbing her powers and becoming the Soul Reaper she could no longer be. In that quiet exchange, Rukia found herself at a crossroads. Her once predictable life had been upended, and she was now a guide, not just to spirits, but to a soul who would in time become her greatest ally. Though she had always been a quiet observer, content to follow orders and remain in the shadows of the Kuchiki legacy, Rukia now stood at the beginning of a new path, one that was intertwined with Ichigo's. She could no longer stand by and watch passively. She had to teach him, to guide him in his new role as a Soul Reaper. But Rukia's task was not simply to train Ichigo in the ways of the Soul Reapers. There was something deeper, something more personal in her journey with him. In Ichigo, Rukia found a kindred spirit, a soul unafraid to defy the rules, to break free of the expectations that had always bound her. With each passing day, as they faced enemies together and grew stronger, Rukia discovered a new sense of purpose, a new connection to the world around her. She no longer felt the weight of her noble blood as a burden, but as a part of a much larger tapestry woven from the threads of destiny, fate, and choice. In the beginning, Rukia's role was simple: to protect Ichigo, to help him understand his powers, and to teach him what it meant to be a Soul Reaper. But as time passed, their bond grew deeper, and Rukia found herself questioning the very foundations of the Soul Society and the duties she had always taken for granted. There were cracks in the structure of the world she had known, and as she spent more time in the living world, those cracks began to widen. Rukia's spiritual journey was not just one of training and growth, it was a journey of self discovery. In Ichigo, she saw a reflection of her own struggles, her doubts, her desire for freedom, and her yearning for a life that was her own. And as she stood by him, helping him uncover the mysteries of his newfound powers, Rukia herself began to uncover the truth about her own past, the secrets that had been hidden from her for so long. Her connection to Ichigo was more than just teacher and student. It was a bond of mutual understanding, of two souls reaching out to one another in the midst of a world that was constantly changing. And though their path was fraught with danger, betrayal, and uncertainty, there was a quiet strength in their partnership. Together, they would face trials that would test their hearts, their wills, and their spirits. But for now, in the calm of this moment, Rukia's journey had only just begun. She had no idea of the struggles that lay ahead, no inkling of the betrayals and the storms that would soon shake the foundations of the Soul Society. All she knew was that she had found something precious in the most unexpected of places: an ally, a friend, and a soul whose destiny was intertwined with her own. And as we rest in this quiet chapter, we are reminded of the power of connection, of bonds formed in the most unlikely of circumstances. For it is through these bonds that we find our strength, our purpose, and our way forward. And so, as we drift through this story, we remain at peace, knowing that every journey, no matter how uncertain, is always made better when shared. In the heart of the Soul Society, where the whispers of eternity can be felt in every breath, there stands a force dedicated to maintaining balance between the worlds of the living and the dead, the Gotei to 13. This sacred group of 13 divisions, each led by a captain, is the very backbone of the Soul Reapers, the protectors of souls. The divisions, each with their own distinct purpose, uphold the fragile order of the Soul Society, ensuring that no soul is lost, no spiritual balance is disrupted. And though their power and influence are vast, their existence is often shrouded in mystery, for the Gotei 13 operates in the quiet shadows, ever watchful, ever steady. Each division has its own duties, its own mission, its own specialized role in the Soul Society. But the heart of this organization lies not just in the execution of these roles, but in the captains who lead them. The captains of the Gotei 13 are the Soul Reapers' most powerful warriors, chosen for their strength, wisdom, and sense of duty. They are figures of authority, revered by their subordinates, yet each carries a weight heavier than any sword they wield. The first division, led by the wise and dignified Shigekuni Yamamoto, is the oldest and most prestigious of the divisions. Yamamoto, a man whose power is unmatched, serves as the commander general of the entire Gotei 13. His sense of duty and devotion to the Soul Society is absolute, and his age, though marking him with a deep and quiet strength, also carries a sorrow, one born of the countless battles fought, the friends lost, and the price of his long immortal life. He is the pillar that holds the Soul Society upright, a figure whose presence instills both awe and respect. Then there is the captain of the 4th Division, Unohana Retsu, whose gentle hands heal wounds yet conceal a deeper, darker past. Beneath her serene exterior lies a terrifying warrior, one whose skills in both healing and combat are unparalleled. Her calm demeanor masks the storm of her history, a history known only to a few, and even fewer understand the true depth of her abilities. Unohana's quiet wisdom guides her division, and her actions, though always measured and composed, carry the weight of experiences she would rather keep hidden. Each division has its own leader, each captain a reflection of the values and ideals they uphold. Byakuya Kuchiki, the stoic captain of the 6th Division, embodies the rigid codes of the Soul Society, a nobleman bound by tradition and duty, yet his cold demeanor conceals the struggles he faces within. His journey is one of inner conflict, torn between the loyalty to his family and the personal bonds he forms, especially with Rukia, his adopted sister. And then there is Kenpachi Zaraki, the captain of the 11th Division, a man who revels in the chaos of battle, whose very being is defined by his thirst for combat. Zaraki is a force of nature, a being who thrives on fighting and challenging the limits of his power. Yet beneath his brash and violent exterior lies a sense of honor, a deep understanding of the value of strength, and a drive to push beyond the boundaries of what he thought was possible. The captains of the Gotei 13, each one unique in their own way, are bound by a shared purpose to protect the Soul Society, to uphold its ideals, and to ensure that balance is maintained between the living world and the afterlife. But their paths are not always easy, for within the peace of the Soul Society, there are whispers of betrayal, hidden agendas, and secrets that could shake the very foundation of their world. For even the greatest captains are not immune to the trials of the world around them. Beneath the polished facade of duty and honor, there are cracks that slowly begin to widen as the Soul Society faces its greatest challenges. The true test of the Gotei 13 lies not in their strength alone, but in their ability to remain united when darkness encroaches upon their world. As the Soul Reapers stand watch over the living and the dead, they must confront the darkness within their own ranks, the shadows of their pasts, and the choices that will define the future of the soul society. And as we rest in this quiet chapter of their journey, we are reminded that even the brightest light can cast a shadow, and that the strength of the soul society lies not only in the captains, but in the bonds they share with one another. In the quiet depths of the soul society, where the air is thick with spiritual energy, there exists a bond more profound than any other, the bond between a soul reaper and their Zanpakuto. The Zanpakuto is not merely a sword, it is an extension of the soul itself, a living, breathing entity that reflects the very essence of its wielder. Each Zanpakuto is unique, shaped by the soul of its master, its powers a reflection of the inner strength and struggles that lie within. For the Soul Reapers, the Zanpakuto is their most sacred companion. It is both a weapon and a teacher, guiding its wielder through trials and tribulations, helping them unlock their deepest potential. The bond between a Soul Reaper and their Zanpakuto is one of the most sacred and intimate relationships within the Soul Society, a relationship that evolves as the Soul Reaper grows. Each Soul Reaper's journey with their Zanpakuto begins in a place that is both familiar and foreign, the inner world. The inner world is a realm that exists within the soul of the Soul Reaper, a space where their deepest desires, fears, and emotions take shape. It is a place of reflection where the Soul Reaper can confront their innermost self, a space that is both personal and sacred. The shape of the inner world varies from one Soul Reaper to another, reflecting their unique personalities, backgrounds, and struggles. Within this inner world, the Soul Reaper meets their Zanpakuto, an entity that is both part of them and separate from them. The Zanpakuto is a reflection of the Soul Reaper's soul, an embodiment of their spirit and their power. It takes on the form of a spirit, often appearing as a figure that is both familiar and strange, a being with its own will and personality, yet deeply connected to the Soul Reaper's own essence. For some Soul Reapers, the meeting with their Zanpakuto is a smooth and harmonious experience, a peaceful communion where the two sides of the soul merge. For others, the journey is more difficult. The bond between Soul Reaper and Zanpakuto is not always easy to forge, for it requires both mastery and understanding. The Zanpakuto may challenge its wielder, pushing them to confront their fears, their weaknesses, and their hidden desires. It is a journey of self-discovery, one that requires patience, introspection, and trust. The process of understanding one's Zanpakuto is not one that happens overnight. It is a long, slow journey, one that unfolds over time. And as the Soul Reaper grows and evolves, so too does the bond with their Zanpakuto. The sword changes as its master changes, and the power it wields grows as the Soul Reaper unlocks more of their potential. One of the most significant aspects of the Zanpakuto is its ability to evolve, to transform as its wielder grows. The Zanpakuto is not a static entity. It is a dynamic force, one that adapts to the changing circumstances of its master's journey. The Zanpakuto has two main forms, the sealed form and the Shikai, the initial release of its power. The sealed form is the sword in its simplest state, a silent companion waiting for the moment it will be called upon. The Shikai, however, is the first unlocking of its true power, a manifestation of the Zanpakuto's unique abilities. But even the Shikai is only a beginning. The true potential of a Zanpakuto is realized in its Bankai form, a final, transformative release of power that reveals the full extent of the Zanpakuto's abilities. Achieving Bankai is a monumental achievement for any Soul Reaper, a moment of great personal growth and spiritual enlightenment. It is the culmination of years of training, introspection, and bonding with the Zanpakuto. Yet the journey to Bankai is not a simple one. It requires a deep understanding of the self, a mastery of the spirit within. The Soul Reaper must face their innermost fears, doubts, and insecurities. Only by confronting these aspects of their soul can they unlock the full potential of their Zanpakuto. The process is slow, deliberate, and often painful, for it requires the Soul Reaper to break through the barriers they have built within themselves. As the Soul Reapers grow, so too does their Zanpakuto. The blade becomes more than just a weapon. It becomes a reflection of the Soul Reaper's journey, their growth, and their understanding of the world around them. It is a bond that deepens with time, becoming an inseparable part of their being, a constant companion that guides them through the trials of life and death. And so, in the quiet, meditative stillness of the inner world, the bond between Soul Reaper and Zanpakuto grows stronger, more intricate, more profound. It is a bond that transcends time and space, a connection that ties the soul of the Soul Reaper to the very essence of their blade. Through this bond, the Soul Reaper finds their true strength, their true purpose, and their true self. In the tranquil stillness of the Soul Society, where the winds carry the whispers of forgotten spirits, there exists a curse older than time itself. It is a curse born of fear, of unfulfilled desires, and of souls trapped in the grip of their own torment. These are the hollows, dark, corrupted beings whose very existence is a testament to the fragility of the soul and the destructive power of neglect. A hollow is not born out of malice or intent. It is the result of a soul's corruption, a soul that has been consumed by its own fear, anger, and regret. These emotions, unaddressed and left to fester, twist the soul into something monstrous. When a soul's fears and desires go unanswered, when they are unable to move on to the next stage of existence, they begin to deteriorate, transforming into a hollow, a mindless creature driven by an insatiable hunger. Hollows are tragic beings, for they are the remnants of what once was, a soul that had the potential for peace, but was lost in the darkness of their own despair. The transformation into a hollow is a painful one, for it is a complete break from the soul's original form. A hollow is not merely a shadow of the soul, it is a twisted parody of what was once whole, its hunger for souls a reflection of its unfulfilled, hollow nature. The curse of the hollow is one that echoes through both the living world and the soul society, for hollows are not bound by the laws of either realm. They exist in the space between life and death, trapped in a state of endless suffering. The more they consume, the greater their hunger becomes, and with each soul they devour, they grow stronger, more dangerous, and more terrifying. It is this curse that the Soul Reapers are tasked with containing. Their duty is to hunt down the hollows, to stop their rampage through the worlds, and to guide the lost souls to their proper resting places. It is a duty that weighs heavily upon the Soul Reapers, for they must constantly battle these soulless beings, protecting both the living and the dead from their insatiable hunger. But the hollows are not the only threat that lurks in the shadows of the Soul Society. There are whispers of a greater, more insidious force that is quietly manipulating the balance of power between the worlds, a force that seeks to control the fate of both the living and the dead. This force is the hollowification, the process by which a soul reaper becomes a hollow, the very thing they are sworn to destroy. The hollowification is a fear that haunts every soul reaper, for it represents the loss of one's humanity, the loss of the very essence of what it means to be a soul reaper. A soul reaper who falls to this curse becomes both predator and prey, trapped in a never ending cycle of hunger and despair. It is a transformation that is both physical and spiritual, one that erases the soul's original identity and replaces it with a hollow's insatiable need. Yet the hollow's curse is not always so clear cut. There are those who walk the fine line between life and death, between hollow and soul reaper. These are the wizard, soul reapers who have embraced their hollow powers, and in doing so, have gained the ability to wield the strength of the hollow without losing themselves to its curse. The wizard are a rare and dangerous group, for they walk a path that is fraught with danger and uncertainty. Their powers, born of the hollow's curse, are both a gift and a curse, and their journey is one of constant struggle against the darkness within. In the quiet moments of reflection, we see the true tragedy of the hollow's curse. It is not merely the transformation of the soul into a mindless beast, it is the loss of oneself, the loss of the hope and peace that every soul deserves. Hollows are not evil by nature, they are simply lost, broken souls, yearning for peace, yet forever denied it. And in this sense, they are a reflection of all souls, a reminder of the delicate balance between life and death, light and dark. And so, in the peaceful silence of this chapter, we are reminded of the fragility of the soul, the danger of leaving emotions unresolved, and the eternal struggle to find peace in a world that is constantly changing. The curse of the hollow is not one that can be easily broken, but it is a lesson, a reminder that no soul is truly lost, and that even in the darkest corners of existence, there is always the possibility of redemption. In the peaceful quiet of Karakura town, where the winds whisper softly through the streets and the moonlight dances gently on the rooftops, Ichigo Kurosaki's life was about to change forever. What had been an ordinary existence, filled with the daily rhythms of school, family, and the occasional moment of self-reflection, was now overshadowed by a world he never knew existed, a world of spirits, soul reapers, and hidden battles between life and death. Ichigo's transformation into a soul reaper did not begin with the clash of steel or the flash of a sword, but with an act of protection, a quiet, desperate decision to save someone dear to him. Rukia Kuchiki, a soul reaper with powers beyond the grasp of ordinary humans, found herself in a moment of vulnerability. Her powers, lost to an unfortunate twist of fate, left her powerless to defend herself against the dangers lurking in the shadows of the living world. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Ichigo, with his fierce instinct to protect those around him, stepped forward. He unknowingly absorbed Rukia's powers, taking on the mantle of a soul reaper in her stead. In that instant, the ordinary world that Ichigo had known, the world of his family, his friends, his simple human existence, began to crumble away, revealing a hidden realm of spirits and shadows that had always been just beyond his sight. The transformation was not immediate, nor was it smooth. Ichigo's journey from an ordinary human to a soul reaper was slow, filled with confusion and uncertainty. He was no longer just Ichigo Kurosaki, the teenager with a sharp tongue and a stubborn will. He was now something more, something tied to a vast and ancient world of spirit warriors and soul guardians. But as the weight of his new responsibilities settled upon him, Ichigo's true journey had only just begun. Rukia, despite her own weakened state, became his guide, teaching him the basics of Soul Reaper life. She explained the importance of the Zanpakuto, the sword that would be both his weapon and his soul's companion. The sword was not just a tool of war, it was an extension of his very being, a reflection of his power and potential. Ichigo's connection with his sword, which he named Zangetsu, would be the key to unlocking his true power. It was through this bond, forged in the fires of uncertainty and fear, that Ichigo would begin to discover the depths of his strength. But this transformation was not just about learning how to fight. It was about understanding the soul's deeper purpose, about balancing the inner world with the outer world, and finding a sense of peace in a life that was suddenly filled with conflict. As Ichigo's spiritual energy began to grow, he began to see the world through different eyes. The once hidden spirits of the living world, those lost souls wandering in the shadows, unsure of their path, now appeared clearly before him. The line between the living and the dead was no longer blurred, but sharply defined. And in this new reality, Ichigo realized that his role was not merely to defend the living, but to protect the souls of those who had passed, guiding them to their rightful place. But the challenges were not only spiritual. The deeper Ichigo delved into the world of the Soul Reapers, the more he understood the weight of his powers. There was much he had to learn, much he had to understand about the delicate balance between the soul society and the living world. There were enemies to face, dark creatures known as hollows, who roamed the living world, preying on lost souls. And as Ichigo would soon discover, there were forces much greater than even the Soul Reapers that sought to upset this balance, forces that would test his resolve and his humanity. Even as Ichigo embraced his new role, a part of him longed for the ordinary life he had once known. He missed the quiet days spent with his family, the simple joy of being a teenager without the weight of a sword on his back and the burden of destiny in his heart. But with every passing day, Ichigo's bond with the Soul Reapers grew stronger. He learned that the sword was not a burden, but a gift, one that carried the potential for change, for hope, and for the protections of all that was good in the world. And so, as the winds of destiny whispered through the world of the living and the dead, Ichigo Kurosaki found himself caught between two worlds, learning to navigate a path that was both uncertain and vast. He had become a soul reaper, a guardian of souls, but he was still Ichigo, the boy with a family, the boy with a heart full of emotion and doubt. His journey, though filled with challenges, was one of growth, a growth that would take him from a reluctant warrior to a leader, and from a boy to a hero. In this quiet moment, as we rest in the stillness of his transformation, we reflect on the beauty of his journey, on how even in the face of fear and uncertainty, the soul finds its way. And with each step, Ichigo grew stronger, his power deepening with the quiet rhythm of time. In the delicate stillness of the Soul Society, where the spiritual winds whispered of ancient legacies and boundless duty, Ichigo Kurosaki found himself standing at the edge of an inevitable confrontation. His journey from an ordinary teenager in Karakura town to a soul reaper had been filled with moments of uncertainty, self discovery, and quiet growth. But it was in this moment, standing before Kuchiki Byakuya, that Ichigo would first come to understand the weight of his new identity. Byakuya Kuchiki, the captain of the 6th Division, was a figure of grace and cold precision, a man whose every movement was a reflection of his noble upbringing and the strict traditions of the Soul Society. His name was synonymous with power, dignity, and unshakable resolve. To face him was no simple matter. Byakuya was not just a soul reaper, he was a symbol of the Soul Society itself, a figure who upheld its ancient codes with unwavering loyalty. For Ichigo, this battle was not only one of strength, but of ideals. He was not fighting for honor, for the preservation of tradition, or for the sake of a noble lineage. He was fighting for the people he cared about, for the lives of those who had been caught in the crossfire of a world he had only just begun to understand. His cause was personal, rooted in the bonds he had formed in the living world, and it was this fierce desire to protect his friends and family that fueled his every action. The clash between Ichigo and Byakuya was a storm of sword strikes and spiritual energy, a dance of power that seemed to shake the very air around them. Ichigo's sword, Zangetsu, hummed with a raw energy, its form unrefined but driven by a deep, unwavering determination. Byakuya's sword, on the other hand, was an extension of his composed and methodical nature, each strike precise and calculated, as though each movement had been practiced for centuries. For Ichigo, this battle was not just about defeating Byakuya, it was about proving to himself that he had the strength to protect those he loved. It was a test of his spirit, of his willingness to stand up against overwhelming odds and to fight even when the odds seemed insurmountable. His sword was his voice, his declaration of intent, and with each swing, Ichigo pushed himself further, reaching into depths of power he had never known existed. Byakuya, ever the stoic, fought with a quiet resolve, his movements swift and graceful, as though he were dancing to an ancient, sacred rhythm. He saw in Ichigo a boy with potential, but also one who lacked the training, the discipline, and the understanding of what it meant to wield the power of a soul reaper. Yet, even in the face of Ichigo's raw strength, Byakuya remained calm, unshaken by the tumultuous force that the young soul reaper unleashed. The battle was fierce, but it was also a lesson. Byakuya, in his own quiet way, was teaching Ichigo something more than just swordsmanship. He was teaching him the importance of discipline, of understanding the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of power. For Byakuya, power was not just about raw strength. It was about control, about using one's abilities for the greater good, and about never allowing emotions to cloud one's judgment. In the midst of the battle, Ichigo's resolve began to shift. He realized that his strength alone would not be enough to defeat Byakuya. To truly protect those he loved, he would need to understand his powers more fully, to refine them, and to connect with the deeper essence of his soul. And in this realization, Ichigo found a new sense of purpose, a purpose that would guide him through the battles to come. As the clash continued, Ichigo's spiritual energy grew, reaching new heights as he drew upon the very core of his being. With each strike, he began to understand the true nature of his sword, Zangetsu, and the bond that connected him to it. His strength was no longer just a force of will. It was a reflection of his heart, of his desire to protect, and of his willingness to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Byakuya, though still the superior fighter, could see the change in Ichigo. The boy was growing, evolving, becoming something greater than he had been at the start of the battle. And in that moment, Byakuya understood that Ichigo's journey was only beginning, that the boy who had once been nothing more than a human teenager was now becoming a soul reaper in his own right. But as the battle drew to a close, it was clear that Ichigo still had much to learn. Byakuya's final blow was not one of destruction, but of quiet wisdom, an acknowledgement of Ichigo's growth, and a reminder that the path ahead would not be easy. For Ichigo, the lesson was clear: strength was not enough. To truly protect others, he would need to understand the nature of his own power and to grow beyond the limits he had once imposed upon himself. In the silence that followed, as the dust settled and the echoes of their swords faded into the night, Ichigo stood, battered but not broken. The battle had been a turning point in his journey, a reminder of the distance he had yet to travel, but also of the strength he had already found within himself. And so, as we rest in this moment of reflection, we remember the quiet wisdom of Byakuya Kuchiki and the growth that comes from struggle. For in every battle, there is a lesson, and in every defeat, there is the potential for rebirth. In the quiet shadows of the Soul Society, beneath the surface of peace and order, a new force was stirring. It was a force born from betrayal, ambition, and a thirst for power that stretched beyond the boundaries of the spiritual world. This force was Aizen Sosuke, the former captain of the 5th Division, whose quiet demeanor and composed nature had once masked the true depths of his intentions. But behind his calm exterior lay a mind far more dangerous, a mind that would alter the fate of both the Soul Society and the living world. Aizen's plot began long before the world knew his true intentions. His deception was subtle, hidden beneath layers of charm, intelligence, and respect. He had always been a master of manipulation, pulling strings behind the scenes, playing a game that no one else knew they were part of. But his true ambition was one of ultimate power, a desire to transcend the limits of the Soul Reapers and the very laws that governed life and death itself. At the heart of Aizen's plan were the Arankar, souls who had once been hollows, but who, through a twisted process of transformation, had become something more. They were beings of both Hollow and Soul Reaper, caught between two worlds, with powers far greater than either. Aizen's experiments had brought these creatures into being, creating a new breed of warriors who would serve as the foundation of his rebellion against the Soul Society. The Arankar were not merely soldiers, they were beings of immense power, each one possessing a unique ability that made them formidable opponents. They were the perfect weapons, capable of devastating the Soul Reapers and breaking through the defenses of the Soul Society. Aizen, with his brilliance and cold ambition, had created an army of monsters, each more dangerous than the last. But the creation of the Arankar was only the beginning of Aizen's true plan. His ultimate goal was to seize the power of the Hogyoku, a powerful artifact that held the key to unlocking an unimaginable level of strength. The Hogyoku had the ability to break down the boundaries between Hollow and Soul Reaper, allowing its wielder to become a being of pure spiritual power, an entity beyond any of the Soul Society's greatest captains, an entity capable of reshaping the world itself. Aizen's manipulation of the Hogyoku was a calculated move, one that he had orchestrated over the course of many years. It was this artifact that had granted him the power to create the Arankar, and it was this artifact that would ultimately give him the strength to overthrow the Soul Society itself. Aizen's ambitions were vast, his vision of the world a dark one, where the rules of the Soul Society were cast aside and replaced with his own order. As Aizen's plot began to unfold, it became clear that he was not simply a traitor. He was a force of destruction, a being who sought to rewrite the very fabric of the Soul Society. His rebellion was not one of petty revenge, but of grand cosmic ambition. Aizen was not content with being a mere captain. He sought to become a god, a being whose will would shape the fate of all souls, living and dead. The Soul Society, for all its power and order, was blindsided by Aizen's betrayal. The truth of his actions remained hidden for so long, buried beneath layers of deception and false loyalty. Even the most trusted members of the Gote 13 were unaware of the depth of his treachery, and by the time they realized the full extent of his plans, it was already too late. Aizen had set his sights on something far greater than mere power. He sought to transcend the very limits of existence itself. As the Arankar began to attack the Soul Society, the world of the Soul Reapers was thrown into chaos. The once secure walls of Serenity were now under siege, and the very foundation of their society was shaken. The battle against the Arankar was not just one of physical strength, but of ideals. Aizen's rebellion was not merely a clash of swords. It was a challenge to the very way the Soul Society had lived for centuries. Ichigo Kurosaki, now fully embracing his role as a Soul Reaper, found himself caught in the heart of this conflict. His bond with Rukia, with his friends, and with the Soul Reapers had led him to this moment, this confrontation with the forces that threatened to destroy everything he had come to care about. But in this battle, Ichigo was no longer just a boy trying to protect his town. He was now part of a much larger struggle, one that would test his strength, his resolve, and his understanding of his own power. And as the world around him crumbled, Ichigo found himself standing before Aizen, the mastermind behind the chaos, a figure whose ambition stretched beyond even the limits of death. The confrontation between Ichigo and Aizen was inevitable, but it was also a battle of ideas. Aizen sought to break the rules, to create a new world where his power reigned supreme. Ichigo, on the other hand, fought to protect the bonds that had shaped him, to preserve the world he had come to love. In this quiet chapter, we reflect on the power of ambition, of betrayal, and of the forces that shape our world. Aizen's dark plot, though filled with shadows and deception, is also a reminder of the importance of loyalty, of friendship, and of the strength that comes from standing together against the darkness. For in the end, it is not power alone that defines us. It is the choices we make, the bonds we forge, and the courage to stand up for what is right. In the shadow of Aizen's growing influence, there rose a group of warriors, unlike any other the Soul Society had ever faced. These were the Espada, Aizen's elite group of Arankar, beings who embodied the very essence of the Hollow's curse, yet were elevated to unimaginable power. They were beings of both Hollow and Soul Reaper, caught between the two worlds, yet transcending both. Each espada was an embodiment of the primal power of the Hollow, honed and refined under Aizen's dark guidance. The espada were not merely soldiers, they were generals, leaders of Aizen's growing army, each one commanding a portion of the vast power Aizen had unlocked through the Hogyoku. Their strength was beyond the reach of any ordinary soul reaper, and each of them was a unique reflection of the darkness within their souls. Yet even as they served Aizen, their power was both a gift and a curse, for the very essence of their being was a constant reminder of the Hollow's destructive potential. At the core of the Espada's power was their ability to release their Zanpakuto, much like the Soul Reapers. But their releases were not merely transformations, they were the embodiment of their deepest desires, their most intense emotions, and their darkest memories. Each espada had a unique ability tied to their inner nature, and these abilities were as much a part of them as their very souls. The leader of the espada was the cold and calculating Ulquiorra Cipher, a being whose emptiness reflected the core of the Hollow's curse. Ulquiorra was a figure of haunting stillness, his eyes hollow, his soul a void. His ability, Lanza del Relampago, was a manifestation of his own emptiness, a powerful strike that could pierce through anything, even the strongest defenses. His cold demeanor was the perfect reflection of his inner nature, someone who had lost their humanity, someone who had become a creature of pure despair. Beside him was the fiery and unpredictable Grimjow Jaeger-Jacques, a former cat-like Hollow, whose pride and bloodlust made him one of the most dangerous members of the Espada. Grimjow's raw power and fierce independence were matched only by his desire for battle. His ability, Pantera, was a reflection of his animalistic nature, allowing him to transform into a more savage, beast-like form. Where Ulquiorra was calm and composed, Grimjow was wild and untamed, a being driven by instinct and the need for combat. Then there was the seductive and deadly Neliel II Odelschwank, the third Espada, whose past was shrouded in mystery. Once a kind and gentle Hollow, Neliel had been forced to abandon her innocence and embrace her darker nature. Her ability, Gamuza, allowed her to transform into a monstrous form, unleashing a power that could rival even the strongest of enemies. Despite her transformation, traces of her former self remained, a reminder of the lost innocence that had been corrupted by the cruelty of the world she now inhabited. Each Espada was a reflection of the depths of hollowification, beings who had once been souls filled with potential, but who had become twisted by their own fear, rage, and despair. Yet despite their monstrous nature, the Espada were not mindless. They were beings of intellect and strategy, each one playing a key role in Aizen's grand plan. They were the vanguard of his rebellion, his most trusted and powerful allies, and they were the key to the success of his dark plot. But within the Espada, there were cracks. Not all of them were fully loyal to Aizen, nor did they share his vision for the future. Some sought their own power, while others quietly questioned his motives. It was this subtle undercurrent of doubt that would eventually come to shape their fates. As powerful as they were, the Espadae were not invincible, and the bonds of loyalty that bound them to Aizen were not as unbreakable as they seemed. In this quiet chapter, we reflect on the duality of the Espada, their power and their curse, their strength and their fragility. They were the perfect warriors, the ultimate soldiers, but they were also souls trapped in a cycle of destruction. The very power that made them formidable was the same power that had twisted their souls into something unrecognizable. And as they stood at the heart of Azen's plan, they were forced to confront the truth of their own existence, beings caught between the worlds of the living and the dead, between humanity and the Hollow's curse. The Espada, for all their might, were not just weapons. They were victims of their own circumstances, reflections of the Hollow's curse, and the pain of their pasts. And in the end, it would be this realization that would shape their fates as they were forced to confront their inner darkness and the true cost of the power they wielded. In the quiet sanctum of the Soul Society, where the scent of cherry blossoms mingles with the hum of spiritual energy, there was an underlying tension, an unspoken sense of unease that had been growing for years, masked by the facade of order and tradition. It was a place of noble families, bound by duty, honor, and history. A place where soul reapers followed their paths with unwavering resolve, upholding the ancient rules and fighting for the balance between the living and the dead. Yet even in this serene world, shadows lurked, shadows that threatened to disrupt everything the Soul Society had worked to protect. For centuries, the Soul Society had been governed by a code, a set of laws that were meant to keep the peace, to maintain the delicate balance of the worlds. But as the years passed, cracks began to form in this perfect structure. The noble families grew more entrenched in their power. The captains of the Gotay 13 grew more distant in their duties, and the very foundations of the Soul Society seemed to tremble beneath the weight of its own history. It was during this time of growing unrest that Aizen Sosuke, the former captain of the 5th Division, began to put his plan into motion. His betrayal was not a sudden, violent act. It was a slow, methodical unraveling of the Soul Society's foundation, a quiet storm that would build in intensity until it could no longer be contained. Aizen's betrayal was a wound that ran deep, cutting to the very heart of the Soul Society's core. Aizen had always been a figure of respect within the Soul Society. He was intelligent, charismatic, and revered by his peers. But beneath his calm exterior, he harbored ambitions that stretched far beyond the walls of the Soul Society. Aizen had grown disillusioned with the rules that governed the Soul Society, with the rigid structure that kept the Soul Reapers confined to their roles. He believed that the Soul Society was a stagnant, corrupt institution, and that its leaders were blind to the changing world around them. Aizen's ultimate goal was not simply power, it was to reshape the entire balance of life and death, to break free from the shackles of the Soul Society's traditions and forge a new world, one where he would reign supreme. His betrayal began with the subtle manipulation of those around him. He began to sow seeds of doubt, whispering of the corruption that lay beneath the surface, of the injustices that the Soul Reapers had turned a blind eye to. Aizen's charm was his greatest weapon, for he made his comrades question everything they had believed in, and in doing so, he began to unravel the very fabric of the Soul Society's unity. The moment of his betrayal came quietly, almost imperceptibly. In a single, devastating act, Aizen revealed his true intentions, plunging the Soul Society into chaos. His betrayal was not just a personal act of treachery, it was a calculated strike against everything the Soul Society stood for. With the help of his loyal followers, the Arankar, beings he had created through forbidden experiments, Aizen set into motion a series of events that would tear the Soul Society apart. The betrayal shook the Soul Society to its core, for it was not just a captain's rebellion, it was a challenge to the very structure of their existence. Aizen's plan was a direct assault on the Soul Reaper's way of life, and it forced the Soul Society to confront the very question that had been buried for so long. Had they become complacent in their power? Had they, too, become blind to the truth that Aizen had seen? As the Soul Reapers struggled to understand the depths of Aizen's betrayal, the ramifications of his actions rippled throughout the Soul Society. The Serenity, the sacred district that housed the elite Soul Reapers, was no longer a place of peace. It had become a battleground where the forces of Aizen clashed with those loyal to the Soul Society, each side fighting not only for control of the realm, but for the soul of the Soul Society itself. For Ichigo Kurosaki, this betrayal was not just an abstract concept, it was personal. Aizen's actions had directly threatened the lives of his friends, his family, and the very existence of the living world. Ichigo had already found himself in the midst of this world of soul reapers and spirits, but now he was thrust into the heart of a battle that was greater than any individual. The Soul Society, once a place of guidance and protection, had now become a place of division, and Ichigo found himself caught in the middle, forced to choose sides and confront the darkness that had infiltrated the very foundation of the Soul Society. But even as the Soul Society was torn apart, there was a sense of quiet strength that remained. In the face of Aizen's betrayal, the Soul Reapers rallied together, not as perfect warriors or noble figures, but as individuals with flaws, doubts, and personal histories. They were not invincible. Each one carried their own burdens, their own scars from battles past. But they were united in their determination to protect the world they had sworn to defend. The betrayal had opened the eyes of the Soul Society to the reality of their situation. They were no longer the unquestioned guardians of balance between the living and the dead. They were flawed, vulnerable, and uncertain. And yet, it was in this moment of vulnerability that the true strength of the Soul Society began to shine through, not in their power, but in their resolve to protect what mattered most. In this quiet chapter, we are reminded that even in the face of betrayal and destruction, there is always the possibility for redemption. The Soul Society, though broken, was not beyond repair. And as the Soul Reapers faced the consequences of their actions, they began to rebuild, to reclaim the peace that had once defined them. But the road ahead would be long, and the scars of Aizen's betrayal would remain, forever etched into the soul of the Soul Society. In the heart of Karakura Town, a place that had once seemed so ordinary, the very fabric of reality began to shift. The peaceful streets where school children once walked and families spent quiet evenings were now the battleground between forces far beyond the comprehension of the human eye. The Soul Reapers, once protectors of the living world, now found themselves locked in a conflict that threatened not only their own realm, but the very existence of both the living and the dead. At the center of this conflict stood Ichigo Kurosaki, the Soul Reaper, who had once been an ordinary teenager, but whose powers had now become a beacon of hope and a target of immense darkness. His quiet town had become a ground zero for the battle between the Soul Society and Aizen's forces, a town that was now caught between worlds, teetering on the brink of destruction. The spiritual pressure in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as if the weight of the universe itself had come to bear down on this small, unassuming place. For Ichigo, the battle in Karakura town was not just another fight. It was personal. This was his home, the place where his family lived, where his friends laughed, and where his life had once been simple and unburdened by the wars of the spiritual realm. Yet now, he was thrust into the heart of a conflict that was far greater than any he had ever faced, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. If Aizen's plans succeeded, Karakura town, along with the rest of the living world, would fall. The battle was a clash of titanic forces. On one side stood Ichigo and the Soul Reapers, each one fighting to protect the balance of existence, to safeguard the living from the dangers that lurked in the shadows of death. On the other stood Aizen and his Aaronkar, powerful beings who had once been hollows, now transformed into deadly warriors, capable of shaking the very foundations of the Soul Society. With their enhanced abilities and ruthless determination, the Aaronkar were more than a match for the Soul Reapers, and the battle raged on with an intensity that seemed to shake the heavens themselves. But the true weight of the battle was not just in the destruction it wrought or the power it displayed. It was in the toll it took on those involved. For Ichigo, the fight in Karakura town was a trial of heart and soul. The bonds he had forged with his friends, the relationships he had built with his comrades, were tested to their limits. The battle was no longer just about defeating Aizen, it was about protecting those he loved, those who had stood by him when the world was still a simple place. As the clash of swords rang out and the sky lit with the energy of spiritual power, Ichigo found himself pushed to the edge of his own limits, his heart heavy with the responsibility of his new role. Among the chaos, there were moments of quiet reflection, brief pauses in the madness where the true nature of the battle was revealed. The Soul Reapers, though powerful, were not invincible. They were warriors with burdens, each one carrying their own past, their own regrets, and their own doubts. And as the fight raged on, it became clear that the true strength of the Soul Reapers did not lie in their power alone, but in the bonds they shared, in the trust they placed in one another. It was this unity, this quiet solidarity, that gave them the strength to continue when everything seemed lost. For Ichigo, the battle was a journey of self-discovery. It was in these moments of intense struggle that he began to understand the true nature of his power, the depth of his responsibility, and the meaning of the bond he shared with his sword, Zangetsu. His power, once raw and untamed, began to crystallize into something more, something focused, something purposeful. And as the battle against Aizen's forces raged on, Ichigo found himself stepping into his role as a protector, not just of his town, but of the spiritual world itself. The Battle of Karakura town was not just a physical conflict, it was a test of will, of heart, and of identity. The warriors on both sides of the conflict were fighting not only to protect the world they had known, but to define who they were in the face of overwhelming darkness. For Ichigo, it was a battle for his own humanity, a struggle to hold onto the things that mattered most in a world that was constantly shifting, constantly changing. As the final blows were struck and the dust began to settle, it was clear that the battle was far from over. But for Ichigo and the Soul Reapers, the fight in Karakura town was a turning point. a moment where the cost of their choices, their sacrifices, and their struggles became a part of them, woven into the very fabric of their souls. The world they had once known was forever changed, and they too were forever changed by the battles they had fought. In this quiet reflection, we are reminded that even in the chaos of battle, there is meaning, there is purpose. For it is in these moments of struggle that the true nature of our strength is revealed, our ability to stand together, to fight for what we believe in, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And as the echoes of the battle fade into the night, we rest in the knowledge that every fight, no matter how great, carries with it the possibility of growth, of change, and of hope. Beyond the walls of the soul society, in the forgotten corners of the spiritual realms, there exists a dark and mysterious group known as the Bounce. These beings, neither entirely human nor entirely spiritual, are a rare and dangerous breed, souls who, through forbidden rituals, have gained the ability to live far beyond their natural lifespans, feeding on the spiritual energy of others. Their existence is an anomaly, a deviation from the natural order of the worlds of the living and the dead, and their presence in the living world would soon lead to a conflict that threatened to upend the balance between the realms. The Bounce were born of an ancient and secretive practice, one that involved the consumption of spiritual energy, allowing them to extend their lives indefinitely. By devouring the souls of humans and other spiritual beings, they could preserve their own existence, growing more powerful with each soul they consumed. But this unnatural immortality came at a cost. The Bounce, though they could live forever, were doomed to an existence of hollow emptiness, unable to ever find peace. They were trapped in a cycle of hunger and consumption, their souls constantly gnawing at the void within them. The leader of the Bounce, a figure known as Karia Jin, was a powerful and charismatic individual, one who harbored a deep resentment toward the Soul Society. Karia's hatred stemmed from a betrayal long past, a betrayal that had cast the Bounce aside, condemning them to live in the shadows, far from the world of the Soul Reapers and the spiritual beings that governed the balance of life and death. Karia's goal was not just survival, it was vengeance. He sought to tear down the Soul Society and rebuild the world in his own image, a world where the Bounce would no longer be outcasts, but rulers of a new order. For Ichigo Kurosaki and the Soul Reapers, the emergence of the Bounce was an unexpected and troubling threat. The Bounce, unlike the Hollows or even the Arankar, were not creatures of pure malice. They were souls, like the Soul Reapers, who had been twisted by their own desire for immortality. Their presence in the living world disrupted the balance, causing rifts in the spiritual energies that flowed between the realms, and their growing influence was felt across Karakura town as the Bounce began to feed on the spiritual energy of the town's inhabitants, draining them of their life force. As the Bounce began to make their move, the Soul Reapers found themselves at a crossroads. They had dealt with Hollows, they had faced the threat of the Arankar, but the Bounce represented something new, something more insidious and complex. They were not mere monsters. They were beings with their own motivations, their own history, and their own sense of justice. Karia Jin, in his quest for revenge, had aligned himself with forces far darker than even the Soul Society had imagined, and it would take all of Ichigo's strength and the combined efforts of the Soul Reapers to stop him. The Bounce's powers were both terrifying and fascinating. Each Bounce possessed a doll, a spiritual being that they had forged through their own abilities. These dolls were extensions of the Bounce soul, manifestations of their power and desires. Each one was unique, with its own abilities and personality, and they were capable of wielding immense spiritual energy. The dolls were as much a part of the Bounce as their own souls, and in many ways, they were the key to the Bounce's continued existence. As Ichigo and the Soul Reapers confronted the Bounce, they were faced with a new kind of enemy, one that required more than just raw power to defeat. The Bounce were not mindless creatures, but beings with emotions, motivations, and a deep sense of self-preservation. Their fight against the Soul Reapers was not merely a battle of strength, but a battle of ideologies, a clash between the Soul Society's ordered way of life and the chaotic, unrelenting hunger of the Bounce. In these quiet moments of reflection, as the battle raged on, the true nature of the Bounce was revealed. They were not evil in the traditional sense. They were victims of their own existence, cursed by their desire for immortality. They had once been human, once had the potential for peace, but had been twisted by the very powers they had sought to control. Their hunger, though insatiable, was a reflection of the void within them, a void that could never be filled, no matter how many souls they consumed. The Soul Reapers, despite their strength and honor, found themselves questioning the nature of their own existence in the face of the Bounce. Were they, too, merely creatures bound by their duty, trapped in a cycle of endless battle? Could they ever truly understand the pain and emptiness that the Bounce felt? And as Ichigo and his allies fought to protect their world, they were forced to confront these questions, each one finding their own answer as they battled for the survival of their worlds. In the end, the Bounce were defeated, but their influence would linger in the memories of the Soul Reapers. The battle against them was not just a physical one, it was a journey of understanding, a reminder that not all enemies are born of malice, and not all battles are won by strength alone. The Bounce, though defeated, left a lasting impact on the Soul Society, a reminder of the fragile line between light and darkness, between life and death, and of the consequences of seeking power without understanding the price that must be paid. In the world of Bleach, where the line between the living and the dead is ever so thin, new forces often emerge from the quiet cracks of reality. One such force was the Fullbringers, a group of individuals who had once been ordinary humans, but were forever changed by the spiritual energy that flowed through their lives. The Fullbringers were unique, their powers different from those of the Soul Reapers or the Hollows. They were humans who had learned to manipulate the very essence of spiritual energy, drawing power from the objects they touched, shaping the world around them through their connection to these items. Unlike the Soul Reapers, who drew their power from their Zanpakuto, or the Hollows, who were born from the souls of the dead, the Fullbringers' abilities were rooted in a different kind of spiritual energy. Their powers were deeply personal, connected to the objects they held dear. These objects, imbued with spiritual energy, acted as extensions of the Fullbringers' souls, granting them unique abilities that allowed them to influence the physical world in remarkable ways. The origin of the Fullbringers was tied to a tragic event in the past, a trauma that had shaped them into the individuals they became. The Fullbringers were born from the spiritual disturbances caused by the passage between the realms of life and death, a product of the fragile connection that exists between the two worlds. They were not born with their abilities, but rather they were chosen by fate, their powers awakened through loss and hardship. At the heart of the Fullbringers was their leader, Tsukishima Shukuro, a man whose abilities were both dangerous and cunning. Tsukishima's power allowed him to manipulate the memories of others, creating a false reality where he could control their actions. His power was a reflection of his own inner turmoil, his desire to shape the world around him and bend it to his will. Tsukishima's goal was not just to gain power, it was to reshape the world according to his own vision, to bring the past into the present and rewrite history itself. Despite the strength of Tsukishima and his Fullbringers, there was a quiet tension within their group, a division between their goals and their desires. While Tsukishima sought to manipulate the world around him, others within the Fullbringers were more reluctant, their abilities a gift they had not asked for, and one they had not fully understood. Their power came with a price, and each Fullbringer had to come to terms with the burden that their abilities carried. The question that haunted them was whether they could truly control their powers, or whether their powers would come to control them. For Ichigo Kurosaki, the arrival of the Fullbringers was another unexpected challenge, one that forced him to confront not only the limits of his own strength, but also the reality of his place in a world filled with spirits and spiritual power. Ichigo had always fought to protect those he loved, but now he found himself questioning what it meant to be a Soul Reaper, what it meant to wield power that could shape the world. The Fullbringers were different from anything Ichigo had faced before. They were human, like him, but their powers were unlike anything he had ever experienced. As Ichigo came into contact with the Fullbringers, he was forced to confront his own doubts and fears. He had always believed that his power was meant to protect others, but now he began to see that there was a deeper, more complex struggle at play. The Fullbringers were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were individuals with their own struggles, their own pain, and their own desires. And yet, their powers were something to be reckoned with, for they held the potential to change the very nature of the balance between life and death. The battle between Ichigo and the Fullbringers was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle for understanding, a confrontation between the different ways of wielding spiritual power. For Ichigo, it was a reminder that power alone was not enough. The Fullbringers had their own burdens to bear, their own fears to confront, and their own paths to walk. And in this quiet, complex struggle, Ichigo began to understand the true nature of his own strength, not just as a Soul Reaper, but as a human being with the ability to change the world around him. But even as Ichigo grew in strength, the Fullbringers faced their own challenges. Tsukishima's manipulations tore at the fabric of their unity, and the inner conflict within their ranks threatened to tear them apart. Each Fullbringer had to face their own past, their own relationship with their powers, and their own choices. And in the end, it was not just the external battle that defined their fate, it was the internal struggle, the quiet battle within their hearts that would determine the course of their lives. As the dust settled and the battle against the Fullbringers came to an end, Ichigo was left to reflect on the lessons he had learned. The Fullbringers had shown him that power was not a simple thing. It was a reflection of the soul, of the desires and fears that lay deep within. And it was this understanding that would guide him as he continued his journey, not just as a soul reaper, but as a person who could see beyond the surface, who could understand the true nature of those around him. In this quiet reflection, we are reminded that the true nature of power is not found in strength alone, but in the choices we make, the bonds we form, and the struggles we face. The Fullbringers, like all souls, were shaped by their experiences, and in the end, it was their own journey of self-discovery that would determine their fate. Deep within the forgotten corners of history, before the Soul Society had established its order, there existed a race of beings who wielded the power of spirit energy in ways that even the Soul Reapers had yet to comprehend. These beings were the Quincies, a group of humans whose spiritual powers were once feared by both the living and the dead. Unlike the Soul Reapers, who use swords to sever the souls of the dead and send them to their proper place, the Quincies use their spiritual energy to destroy, to eliminate the very essence of a hollow, leaving no trace behind. For centuries, the Quincies had fought against the hollow threat, often at odds with the Soul Society, whose duty it was to maintain the balance of souls. The Quincies, with their overwhelming power and desire for purity, sought to rid the world of hollows entirely. Their methods, though effective, were seen as reckless by the Soul Reapers, for the Quincy's attacks did not preserve the souls of the hollows. Instead, they destroyed them completely, disrupting the natural order of the spiritual realms. The conflict between the Soul Reapers and the Quincies had been long and bitter, a silent war fought in the shadows, with each side blaming the other for the imbalance in the world. But as time passed, the Quincies faded into legend. The last great battle between the Soul Reapers and the Quincies had been a decisive one, and the Quincies were thought to have been eradicated. Their power, their ways, their existence, all were believed to be lost to history. But the Quincies had never truly disappeared. In the quiet depths of the world, a single Quincy king, Uwak, had survived, his power and influence growing in the shadows. Uwak was not just a king, he was a force of nature, a being who could manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. His ability to absorb the powers of other Quincies, to transfer his own essence across time, made him nearly immortal, and it was through his guidance that the remnants of the Quincy race were brought together once more, reborn as the Vandenreich, a kingdom forged in the heart of a forgotten legacy. Huak's goal was nothing short of complete domination, his desire to reshape the world in his own image, to impose his rule over both the Soul Society and the living world. The Quincies, under his command, would wipe out the Soul Reapers and their corrupted ways, restoring balance through their own form of order, one defined by power, purity, and control. As Ewok and his Vonenreich began their march toward the Soul Society, they brought with them an army of Quincies, each one possessing the ability to harness reishi, spiritual particles that could be molded into powerful weapons. Their arrows, forged from this energy, were capable of piercing through the strongest defenses, of slaying even the most powerful of foes. And yet, it was not just their physical strength that made them formidable, it was the strength of their ideals. The Quincy's were a people driven by a singular purpose, bound by a shared belief in the righteousness of their cause. The arrival of the Quincy's in the Soul Society was a shockwave that reverberated across the entire realm. The Soul Reapers, for all their might, found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. The Quincy's were not just another enemy to be defeated, they were a force that challenged the very foundation of the Soul Society's existence. Their power was unlike any the Soul Reapers had faced, and their motives were clear. They sought to destroy the Soul Society and replace it with their own vision of order. Ichigo Kurosaki, who had already faced the threat of the Hollow and the Arankar, now found himself facing an enemy far more personal, an enemy tied to his own existence, to his own power. As he learned of the Quincy legacy and the return of their king, Ichigo began to realize that his own past, his own bloodline, was more intertwined with the Quincy's than he had ever known. As the Quincy's began their assault on the Soul Society, it became clear that they would not be easily defeated. Yuak's power was overwhelming, and his ability to manipulate time and space made him an adversary unlike any Ichigo had faced before. But even as the battle raged on, Ichigo could sense a deeper, more personal struggle within himself. The Quincy's were not just a distant threat, they were part of a much larger mystery that would lead Ichigo to the very heart of his own soul. In the face of this new enemy, Ichigo found himself questioning not only the purpose of his powers, but also his own identity. The Quincy's represented a force that sought to erase the very existence of the Soul Reapers, and with it, the balance between life and death. Ichigo's role in this conflict became clearer, and the weight of his responsibilities grew heavier with each passing moment. But the fight was not just about power, it was about the choices each side made, the paths they chose to walk, and the cost of those choices. The Quincy's, though they fought for what they believed was right, were still bound by the same flaws that had plagued them in the past. And as the battle unfolded, Ichigo began to understand that true strength was not simply about defeating an enemy, but about understanding the nature of that enemy and the heart that drives them. As the battle between the Soul Reapers and the Quincy's raged on, Ichigo's path was no longer just about protecting his town, his friends, or the Soul Society. It was about understanding the very nature of his power, of the legacy he carried, and of the choices he would make in the face of a world that was constantly shifting, constantly changing. For Ichigo, the Quincy threat was not just a battle, it was a journey of self-discovery, a test of his strength and his heart. Yuak, the Quincy king, was not merely a man, he was a force of nature, a being whose power transcended that of any other soul. His very presence seemed to warp the spiritual energies of the world, bending them to his will. His influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of the Soul Society, reaching into the hearts of the living and the dead alike. And though his story was one steeped in mystery and tragedy, it was clear that his ambitions would alter the course of history itself. Yuak's origins were as ancient as the very foundations of the Soul Society. He was not born like other Quincy's. His existence had been forged through an event that no one truly understood, an event that granted him a power far beyond that of any Quincy before him. His ability to manipulate the very fabric of time, to absorb and redistribute spiritual energy, made him an entity unlike any the world had ever seen. He was a king not only in title, but in power, ruling over the Quincy's with an iron fist and demanding loyalty from those who followed him. At the core of Yuwak's power was the Almighty, a gift that allowed him to see into the future, to predict the movements of his enemies before they even made them. This ability gave him an advantage over every opponent he faced, allowing him to stay several steps ahead in battle. But it was not just his ability to see the future that made him dangerous. It was his Spirit King power, the power that granted him dominion over the very essence of life and death. Yuwak had the ability to absorb the powers of others, to reshape reality itself, and to extend his own life beyond natural limits. Yuwak's ambition was clear. He sought to reshape the world, to create a new order where he would reign supreme and where the old balance of life and death would be destroyed. His ultimate goal was to bring about the end of the Soul Society, to destroy the Soul Reapers and their corrupted ways, and to create a world where the Quincy's would rule over all. His power was not just about destruction, it was about control, about bending the very forces of the spiritual world to his will. But Yuak's ambitions were not solely driven by a desire for power. There was something deeper, something more personal, at the heart of his quest. Yuak had long been haunted by the history of the Quincy's, by the war that had nearly wiped them out, and by the betrayal that had left his people scattered and forgotten. His anger, his thirst for revenge, was not just directed at the Soul Society. It was directed at the very system of existence that had cast the Quincy's aside, condemning them to live in the shadows, while the Soul, Reapers, and their allies thrived in the light. For Yuak, the battle against the Soul Reapers was more than just a war. It was a battle for the soul of his people, a war to reclaim the power and legacy that had been taken from them. It was a quest to prove that the Quincy's, and he himself, were not mere shadows, not forgotten remnants of a lost history, but rightful rulers of the spiritual world. As Yuwak's army, the Vandenreich, advanced on the Soul Society, the world trembled beneath the weight of his ambition. The Quincy's, once believed to be extinct, now stood united under their king, their power and numbers greater than ever before. They were not just a threat to the Soul Reapers, they were a force that could reshape the very fabric of the spiritual realms, and they were determined to see their king's vision realized. Ichigo Kurosaki, the Soul Reaper who had long fought to protect his world, now found himself facing the ultimate challenge. Yuak's power was beyond anything Ichigo had ever encountered, and the stakes of their battle could not have been higher. The survival of the Soul Society, the balance between life and death, and the future of the living world itself hung in the balance. For Ichigo, this battle was not just about defeating an enemy, it was about protecting everything he had fought for, everything he had come to love, and everything he believed in. In the face of Yuak's overwhelming power, Ichigo found himself questioning not only his own strength, but the very nature of his existence. What was the true purpose of his power? Was it to protect his friends, his family, and his world? Or was it something more, a force that could shape the very destiny of the worlds? As Ichigo confronted the Quincy King, he was forced to confront his own identity, his own purpose, and the choices he would have to make in order to defeat the man who sought to destroy everything. Yuak's influence spread like a dark cloud over the Soul Society. his every move calculated, his every section deliberate. He was not just a king, he was a symbol of the forces that lay beyond the control of any single being, a reminder that even the strongest of warriors must face the forces of fate and destiny. And yet, even in the face of such power, Ichigo's resolve remained unshaken. For Ichigo, the fight was not about winning. It was about fighting for what was right, for the bonds he had formed, and for the future that still lay ahead. As the battle between Ichigo and Yuwak reached its peak, the very nature of their conflict became clear. It was not just a battle of strength, it was a battle of ideologies, of beliefs, of wills. Yuak sought to impose his vision of the world, to remake it in his image, while Ichigo fought to protect the world as it was, to defend the balance that had existed for centuries. And in this quiet, reflective moment, we are reminded of the eternal struggle between light and dark, between creation and destruction, between the forces that seek to control and the hearts that strive to protect. The story of Yuak, the Quincy King, is not just a tale of power, it is a tale of ambition, of loss, of legacy, and of the choices that define us all. Yuak, the Quincy King, was not merely a man, he was a force of nature, a being whose power transcended that of any other soul. His very presence seemed to warp the spiritual energies of the world, bending them to his will. His influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of the soul society, reaching into the hearts of the living and the dead alike. And though his story was one steeped in mystery and tragedy, it was clear that his ambitions would alter the course of history itself. Yuak's origins were as ancient as the very foundations of the Soul Society. He was not born like other Quincy's. His existence had been forged through an event that no one truly understood, an event that granted him a power far beyond that of any Quincy before him. His ability to manipulate the very fabric of time, to absorb and redistribute spiritual energy, made him an entity unlike any the world had ever seen. He was a king not only in title, but in power, ruling over the Quincy's with an iron fist, and demanding loyalty from those who followed him. At the core of Yuak's power was the Almighty, a gift that allowed him to see into the future, to predict the movements of his enemies before they even made them. This ability gave him an advantage over every opponent he faced, allowing him to stay several steps ahead in battle. But it was not just his ability to see the future that made him dangerous. It was his Spirit King power, the power that granted him dominion over the very essence of life and death. Yuak had the ability to absorb the powers of others, to reshape reality itself, and to extend his own life beyond natural limits. Yuak's ambition was clear. He sought to reshape the world, to create a new order where he would reign supreme, and where the old balance of life and death would be destroyed. His ultimate goal was to bring about the end of the Soul Society, to destroy the Soul Reapers and their corrupted ways, and to create a world where the Quincy's would rule over all. His power was not just about destruction, it was about control, about bending the very forces of the spiritual world to his will. But Yuak's ambitions were not solely driven by a desire for power. There was something deeper, something more personal, at the heart of his quest. Yuak had long been haunted by the history of the Quincy's, by the war that had nearly wiped them out, and by the betrayal that had left his people scattered and forgotten. His anger, his thirst for revenge, was not just directed at the Soul Society. It was directed at the very system of existence that had cast the Quincy's aside, condemning them to live in the shadows while the Soul Reapers and their allies thrived in the light. For Ewok, the battle against the Soul Reapers was more than just a war. It was a battle for the soul of his people, a war to reclaim the power and legacy that had been taken from them. It was a quest to prove that the Quincy's and he himself were not mere shadows, not forgotten remnants of a lost history, but rightful rulers of the spiritual world. As Ivok's army, the Vandenreich, advanced on the Soul Society, the world trembled beneath the weight of his ambition. The Quincy's, once believed to be extinct, now stood united under their king, their power and numbers greater than ever before. They were not just a threat to the Soul Reapers, they were a force that could reshape the very fabric of the spiritual realms, and they were determined to see their king's vision realized. Ichigo Kurosaki, the Soul Reaper who had long fought to protect his world, now found himself facing the ultimate challenge. Yuak's power was beyond anything Ichigo had ever encountered, and the stakes of their battle could not have been higher. The survival of the Soul Society, the balance between life and death, and the future of the living world itself hung in the balance. For Ichigo, this battle was not just about defeating an enemy, it was about protecting everything he had fought for, everything he had come to love, and everything he believed in. In the face of Yuak's overwhelming power, Ichigo found himself questioning not only his own strength, but the very nature of his existence. What was the true purpose of his power? Was it to protect his friends, his family, and his world? Or was it something more, a force that could shape the very destiny of the worlds? As Ichigo confronted the Quincy King, he was forced to confront his own identity, his own purpose, and the choices he would have to make in order to defeat the man who sought to destroy everything. Yuak's influence spread like a dark cloud over the Soul Society, his every move calculated, his every action deliberate. He was not just a king, he was a symbol of the forces that lay beyond the control of any single being, a reminder that even the strongest of warriors must face the forces of fate and destiny. And yet, even in the face of such power, Ichigo's resolve remained unshaken. For Ichigo, the fight was not about winning. It was about fighting for what was right, for the bonds he had formed, and for the future that still lay ahead. As the battle between Ichigo and Yuak reached its peak, the very nature of their conflict became clear. It was not just a battle of strength. It was a battle of ideologies, of beliefs, of wills. Yuak sought to impose his vision of the world, to remake it in his image, while Ichigo fought to protect the world as it was, to defend the balance that had existed for centuries. And in this quiet, reflective moment, we are reminded of the eternal struggle between light and dark, between creation and destruction, between the forces that seek to control and the hearts that strive to protect. The story of Yuak, the Quincy King, is not just a tale of power. It is a tale of ambition, of loss, of legacy, and of the choices that define us all. The air was thick with the weight of destiny as the final battle between Ichigo Kurosaki and Yuak, the Quincy King, began to unfold. It was not just a fight between two powerful beings. It was the culmination of everything that had come before, the culmination of Ichigo's journey, his growth, and his struggle to understand his place in a world that constantly shifted between light and darkness. Yuak, with his nearly boundless power and ability to manipulate the very fabric of reality, stood as a towering figure of malevolence. He was not just a man, but a force that had the power to rewrite history, to bend time to his will, and to reshape the future in his own image. His vision for the world was one of total control, a world where the Quincy's reigned supreme, where the old order was torn asunder, and where he alone held the power to decide the fate of every soul. For Ichigo, this was the final test. He had faced countless battles, countless foes, and had lost and gained much along the way. But now, standing before Yuak, he faced not just an enemy, but the embodiment of the forces that had sought to destroy everything he had ever cared about. Yuak was the culmination of the chaos that had come before, the culmination of betrayal, ambition, and the desire to rewrite the rules of existence itself. The battle between Ichigo and Yuak was not one of sheer physical strength alone. It was a battle of wills, of ideals, and of destinies. Yuak, with his almighty power, could see the future and predict Ichigo's every move. He could manipulate time, bend the flow of history, and erase the very existence of his opponents. For Ichigo, the fight was more than just a battle for survival. It was a fight for his very identity, for his right to live in a world where free will, choice, and personal bonds mattered. As the two warriors clashed, the air around them crackled with energy, a storm of spiritual power that threatened to tear the very world apart. Ichigo's sword, Zangetsu, glowed with the strength of his resolve, its power fueled by his desire to protect those he loved. But Yuak's power was overwhelming, a dark tide that sought to drown Ichigo's light. Despite his strength, despite his growth, Ichigo found himself pushed to the very edge of his limits. For the first time, he realized just how small and fragile he was in the face of Yuak's absolute control over the world. But Ichigo's strength was not defined by the power he wielded. It was defined by the heart that beat within him, by the bonds he had formed, and by the lessons he had learned on his journey. Yuak, for all his power and knowledge, could not understand this. He could not understand that the true strength of a warrior lies not in their ability to predict and control, but in their ability to fight for something greater than themselves. As the battle continued, Ichigo's resolve only deepened. He was not fighting for himself, not fighting for glory, but for the world he loved, for the people he had sworn to protect. And in this quiet understanding, Ichigo found the strength to rise above Yuak's power, to break free from the chains of fate that had bound him for so long. In the final moments of their clash, Ichigo was able to tap into a power beyond his own, a power that resonated with the very essence of his being. It was not a power given to him by his sword or by his training or by his enemies. It was a power born from his heart, from his will to protect, and from his understanding of the world he fought for. With this newfound strength, Ichigo was able to strike at Yuak with a force that shattered the Quincy King's plans. The battle ended not with the destruction of the world, but with the preservations of everything Ichigo had fought for, the bonds of friendship, the love for his family, and the hope that one day a world of balance could be restored. But the fight was not just about defeating Yuak. It was about understanding the nature of true power. Ichigo realized that true strength did not lie in absolute control or in rewriting the world to suit one's own desires. True strength lay in the ability to fight for something, to protect others, and to make choices that shaped one's own destiny. And in this realization, Ichigo found peace. As the echoes of battle faded into the distance, the world began to heal. The wounds of the thousand-year blood war, though deep, would eventually close. The balance between the living and the dead would be restored, and the Soul Society would continue to watch over the souls of both worlds. But for Ichigo, the war was over. He had grown, not just as a Soul Reaper, but as a person. And in this quiet moment of reflection, he understood that the journey had not just been about defeating enemies, it had been about discovering who he truly was and what kind of world he wanted to protect. The Soul Society, a realm built on order and tradition, had long stood as the guardian between the living and the dead, preserving the balance that kept the world in harmony. Yet behind the walls of the serenity, the noble families, and in the legendary captains, there was a quiet truth that few dared to acknowledge. Sacrifice was the true price of peace. The Soul Reapers, despite their great power and unyielding resolve, had always carried with them the weight of their decisions, the lives they had taken, the souls they had guarded, and the ones they had lost. As the war with Yuwach and the Quincy continued to unfold, the Soul Reapers found themselves facing not just a battle of strength, but a battle of ideals. The foundations of the Soul Society were shaken, and the very soul of the realm was at risk. The cost of this war was not measured in casualties alone. It was measured in the choices made, in the sacrifices that had to be made for the greater good. For the Soul Reapers, the ultimate sacrifice was the very thing they had been trained to protect, their lives. Every captain, every member of the Gotei 13 had sworn an oath to protect the Soul Society and the souls of the living. But as the threat of the Quincy's grew, it became clear that the price of this protection was not one that could be paid with mere strength alone. It was a price that demanded something far more precious, their very lives. The sacrifices of the Soul Reapers were not always grand or dramatic. Some were quiet, personal, and often unnoticed by those around them. There were captains who laid down their lives to protect their comrades, knowing that their actions would ensure the survival of their division and the Soul Society as a whole. Others fought on the front lines, facing enemies that were not only powerful, but deeply personal. Each battle, each clash of steel, was a reminder of the duty that bound them to their cause. But the greatest sacrifice of all was not the loss of life, it was the loss of innocence. The war with the Quincy's, the thousand-year blood war, forced the Soul Reapers to confront the darker aspects of their own existence. They had long upheld the rules of the Soul Society, believing in their own righteousness, in the purity of their cause. But as the war progressed, they began to see that the world they had fought to protect was not as simple as they had once believed. The lines between good and evil were blurred, and the price of their actions began to weigh heavily on their hearts. For Ichigo Kurosaki, the journey had always been about protecting those he loved. But now, as he stood alongside the Soul Reapers, he understood the cost of that protection. The Soul Reapers, like him, were not invincible. They were not immune to loss, to regret, or to the crushing weight of their responsibilities. And as Ichigo watched his comrades fall one by one, he realized that the true strength of the Soul Reapers was not found in their swords or their abilities. It was found in their willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The sacrifices of the Soul Society were not just about the lives lost in battle, but about the choices that had to be made in the face of impossible odds. The Soul Reapers had to confront the truth of their own existence, the fact that their duty to protect the living and the dead often came at the expense of their own happiness, their own peace. And in this quiet, painful truth, they found their true strength. Ichigo, having seen the toll of the war on his friends and comrades, began to understand the price of leadership and sacrifice. He had always believed that strength was the key to victory, that power alone could protect those he loved. But as the war came to an end, he realized that true strength was not found in raw power. It was found in the willingness to make difficult choices, to fight for something greater than oneself, and to carry the weight of those choices with honor. As the war with Yuwak drew to a close, the Soul Society began to rebuild. The scars of battle would remain, but so too would the lessons learned. The sacrifices made by the Soul Reapers were not in vain. They had fought not just for victory, but for the future of the worlds they protected. And though they had lost much, they had gained a deeper understanding of the world they had sworn to protect. In this quiet moment of reflection, we are reminded of the true cost of peace and the strength required to carry the weight of sacrifice. The Soul Reapers, though they had faced unimaginable loss, had never wavered in their duty, and in their sacrifice, they had shown the true meaning of strength. As the last echoes of battle faded and the dust of war settled, the quiet realization began to take shape. The strength of the Soul Reapers, of Ichigo and his friends, was not measured by the number of victories they had won or the power they had wielded. It was measured by the bonds they had forged, the connections they had made with one another, and the unwavering resolve they had shown in the face of adversity. The Soul Reapers had long stood as the protectors of the balance between the living and the dead, but their true strength had always come from something deeper, something more human. It was their love for one another, their sense of duty, and their willingness to sacrifice for the greater good that made them true heroes. They were not invincible, they were not perfect, they were flawed individuals, each with their own struggles, their own fears, and their own dreams. But it was through these flaws, through their vulnerability, that their true strength had been revealed. Ichigo Kurosaki, who had once been an ordinary teenager caught in a world of spirits and soul reapers, had come to understand the importance of these bonds. His journey, though fraught with trials and tribulations, had been one of growth, not just in power, but in heart. The relationships he had built with Rukia, Orihime, Chad, and the others had become the cornerstone of his strength. It was their unwavering belief in him, their willingness to fight by his side, that had kept him going, even in the darkest of times. Each of Ichigo's allies had their own story, their own journey. Rukia Kuchiki, who had once been a soul reaper lost in her own duties and responsibilities, had found in Ichigo not only an ally but a friend, someone who could show her the importance of connection, of letting go of the burdens of the past. Orihime Inoue, with her gentle heart and her unique abilities, had become a beacon of hope in the midst of despair, reminding Ichigo that even in the darkest of moments, there was always the possibility of healing. Chad, with his quiet strength, had stood by Ichigo as a steadfast protector, his own journey of self discovery and growth intertwined with Ichigo's. The bonds between these heroes had become a source of strength that transcended the limits of their powers. They were not just warriors, they were friends, comrades, and family. They fought not for themselves, but for one another and for the world they had come to protect together. The true beauty of their journey was not found in the battles they fought or the enemies they defeated, but in the way they had supported each other, in the way they had lifted each other up when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. The sacrifices they made, the choices they faced, and the love they shared were what truly defined them as heroes. As the war against the Quincy's came to an end, the bonds between Ichigo and his friends grew even stronger. The struggles they had faced together had shaped them into something more than just individuals. They had become a family, bound by the unbreakable ties of loyalty, love, and shared purpose. They had fought side by side, stood together in the face of darkness, and emerged stronger for it. In this quiet moment of reflection, we are reminded of the importance of these bonds. True strength lies not in power alone, but in the connections we make with others. The heroes of the Soul Society and Ichigo's world had shown that the greatest power came from the heart, that the bonds of friendship, loyalty, and love were the true forces that held the world together. And so, as Ichigo and his friends stood together, victorious but forever changed, they understood that their journey was not over. The road ahead would be long, filled with new challenges and new battles, but they would face it together. For they were more than just soul reapers or warriors. They were heroes, bound by their shared experiences and the unbreakable ties of friendship. After the dust of war had settled and the echoes of battle had long faded into the past, the world began to heal. The clash between the Soul Society and the Quincy's had tested the very fabric of existence. But now, in the quiet aftermath, there was a sense of calm that began to spread across the spiritual realms. The war was over, and the enemies that had once threatened to destroy everything the Soul Reapers had fought to protect were no more. But even in this peace, the scars of the battle would remain, quiet reminders of the sacrifices made and the lessons learned. Ichigo Kurosaki, who had once been thrust into a world he could barely understand, now found himself standing at the crossroads of a new beginning. The war against the Quincy's had left him changed, not just in power, but in heart. He had grown from a boy trying to protect those he loved into a man who understood the true cost of that protection. His journey had been long, filled with pain, loss, and countless battles. But in the end, it was not the battles or the victories that defined him. It was the relationships he had forged, the bonds he had built with those around him, and the strength of his heart. The Soul Reapers, though weary from their struggles, had begun to rebuild. The Serenity, once scarred by the violence of war, was now a place of healing, a place where the spirit of unity could once again take root. The noble families, long divided by their own internal conflicts, began to reconcile, understanding that the future of the Soul Society depended not on their individual power, but on their ability to work together for the greater good. And though the wounds of the past would take time to heal, there was a quiet hope that the Soul Society could emerge stronger, more united, and more resilient than ever before. As for Ichigo, the peace he had fought for had finally come, but it was not a peace that was easily won. He had learned that peace was not simply the absence of war, it was the quiet acceptance of the impermanence of all things, the understanding that even in the stillness, there was always the potential for change. The battles he had fought had not just been about defeating enemies, they had been about understanding the nature of power, of responsibility, and of the heart. And in this newfound peace, Ichigo understood that he had a role to play, not just as a protector, but as a bridge between the worlds, between the living and the dead, between the soul reapers and the humans they had sworn to protect. His friends, too, found peace in their own ways. Rukia Kuchiki, whose journey had begun with a sense of duty and isolation, had found a new sense of purpose in her bond with Ichigo and the others. She was no longer just a soul reaper. She was someone who understood the importance of connection, of the ties that bound them all together. Orihime Inoue, once unsure of her place in the world, had become a beacon of hope, her gentle heart and unwavering support giving strength to those around her. Chad, with his quiet strength, had found peace in the understanding that his power, though born from tragedy, could be used to protect those he loved. Together, they had all come through the war, changed, yes, but still standing. And now, as the world began to heal, they would continue to walk their paths, knowing that their bond would remain unbroken no matter what challenges lay ahead. The peace they had fought for was not just a return to the status quo, it was a chance for growth, for understanding, and for the chance to build a future where the lessons of the past were not forgotten, but honored. The battle for the Soul Society had been won, but the battle for the future was only just beginning. For Ichigo and his friends, the journey was far from over. But in this quiet moment of peace, there was a sense of hope, a sense that the future could be better, one where the bonds of friendship, love, and duty would guide them through whatever came next. As the world settled into a new era of peace, the story of Ichigo Kurosaki, the Soul Reaper who had once been an ordinary boy from Karakura Town, took on a new significance. The battles he had fought, the friends he had made, and the enemies he had defeated were all part of a larger narrative, one that had spanned both the living world and the spiritual realms, one that had shaped the very nature of the Soul Society and its future. Ichigo's legacy was not just one of strength, it was a legacy of growth, of change, and of the unwavering desire to protect those he loved. His journey, which had begun with confusion and uncertainty, had evolved into a story of understanding, of embracing the complexities of life and death, and of finding balance between the two. In the end, Ichigo had not only become a soul reaper, but a symbol of hope for both the living and the dead. As he stood at the edge of the Soul Society, looking out at the peaceful world he had helped to preserve, Ichigo reflected on all that he had learned. The road had been long, filled with struggles and sacrifices, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery. He had come to understand the true nature of his power, not as a weapon to be wielded, but as a force that could shape the world around him. He had learned that strength was not about domination, but about protection, about fighting not for oneself, but for the ones you cared about. His role in the Soul Society was no longer just about wielding a sword or facing enemies. It was about guiding the next generation of Soul Reapers, about passing on the lessons he had learned, and about ensuring that the balance between the living and the dead was maintained for future generations. Ichigo knew that the world would continue to change, that new challenges would arise, but he also knew that the legacy of the Soul Reapers and his own legacy was one of resilience, of standing strong in the face of uncertainty, and of protecting those who could not protect themselves. The bonds he had formed with his friends, with Rukia, Orihime, Chad, and the others, would forever remain at the core of his journey. Their strength, their loyalty, and their unwavering support had been the true source of his power. And as the years passed, Ichigo would continue to cherish those bonds, knowing that, no matter where his path took him, they would always be by his side. And so, as the story of Ichigo Kurosaki continued, it was no longer one of conflict and struggle. It was a story of peace, of reflection, and of the quiet strength that comes from understanding one's place in the world. His legacy was one of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of light. For Ichigo, the battle was not over. It was simply a new chapter, one that would be written not with swords and blood, but with the choices he made and the future he helped shape. In the end, Ichigo's legacy would be remembered not for the battles he fought, but for the life he lived, the love he gave, the friendships he forged, and the peace he helped create. It was a legacy that would endure, not just in the pages of history, but in the hearts of those who followed in his footsteps. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through the lore of Bleach. May the stories of Ichigo Kurosaki, his friends, and their world bring you comfort as you drift off into peaceful rest. Let the bonds of friendship, loyalty, and sacrifice continue to resonate in your heart, and may your dreams be as calm as the night itself. Good night, dear listener.